Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Thomas Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. On this show, I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry. Last week, I had the opportunity to talk with Maria Gonzalez of RG&Y about her journey from launching the family winery in Parras, Mexico, to her newest venture in the North Forks region of Long Island. And today, I'm excited to continue learning about this amazing region with the legendary winemaker, Alie Shaper. But before I formally introduce her and dive in, it's time for a sponsor message. Today's episode is sponsored by Barrels Ahead. At Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, we help wineries and craft beverage producers unlock their story to unleash their revenue. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. Bianca Harmon, our D2C strategist, is joining us today. How's it going, Bianca?
It's going really good, Drew. Really excited to talk to Alie today.
Yes, today we have Alie Shaper on the show. Alie's the co-founder and winemaker for Chronicle Wines, which has a few brands and wineries under its name. How's it going, how's it going, Alie?
It's going really great. Thanks. And glad to be on the show and talk shop.
Yes, Alie. So thank you so much for joining us. So just kind of starting off, how did you get into the industry?
It was rather circuitous. It wasn't something I had planned, as a teenager. Like, I want to grow up and make wine. Mm-hmm. There was, very little in the way of really sort of any wine consumption in my family growing up. So it's just something that, sort of sprouted out of my soul, I guess. I had actually gone to school for engineering, and that happened to be in the Finger Lakes. I was at Cornell University.
Okay.
And Cornell has, since then, the hotel school has merged with their business school. But the point being, in the hotel program, there's a beverages concentration, so that hotel attendees can learn about coordinating and managing beverage programs. Mm-hmm. And as part of that, they have what's essentially a Wines 101, wines around the world course. And
Cornell's famous for their hospitality.
Yeah, I've still got some terrific college friends that went through the hotel school, and they're all amazing, very outgoing, socially adept folks. But having been an engineering student, every course was math and more math and even more math. And I said I need to do something not math. And when you're 21. And you're like, oh, I can drink in class on a Wednesday afternoon. Sounds cool. Great. Yeah. So, but what I didn't expect getting into it, I thought it would be fun, but I didn't expect that I would find something that I loved. Mm-hmm. And that was just sort of that first seed that got planted. And, it turns out wine is not an easy subject either. You really have to do some work to get your mind around all the different appellations and the regions and the grape varieties, this, of course, was like scratching of the surface. So,
yeah. And as an engineer, I'm sure you dove in just very.
As that detail nerd. Yeah. You can kind of glom onto that pretty well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But,
but you didn't go straight into the wine industry. I read that you were making helmets for fighter jets.
Well, that was at one of my first jobs out of school. Yeah. So it so happened, at the time in the 90s, a lot of the manufacturing was going on in Silicon Valley. And that's where a lot of the engineering jobs were. And, that was sort of another thing I hadn't planned on in my young adult life, that I was going to pick up and, uproot from the East Coast and shift all the way to the West Coast. But that's where the jobs were. And I was first at a company called Trimble Navigation, and they produced some of the earlier global positioning devices for like truck fleets and auto fleets, and some of the earliest GPS circuitry for handheld devices and whatnot. And my subsequent job was at an aerospace firm, and we developed fighter jet helmets and whatnot for weapon systems and whatnot. I worked a little bit on the Joint Strike Fighter weapons display system. But I'm very much a pacifist, so it was interesting as technology. But when I stopped and thought about oh, I'm kind of helping the weapons thing. I'm not sure that's really where I want to go in my life. You know?
You're like, I didn't think I was be working on fighter
Yeah,
jets.
it's like, oh, I didn't expect that. You know, I did want to work on aircraft
Uh-huh.
or on spacecraft.
Mhm.
But you know, when I was 4, I knew that I wanted to be an astronaut when I was 4. Um, so that's why I had started out on the engineering route.
Mhm.
But this, you know, this was all in California,
Yeah.
and it so happened at this second job, they had arranged the work week such that it was Monday to Friday the first week, and then Monday to Thursday the second week, with 9 hours a day
Oh, nice.
instead of 8 hours a day, so that every other weekend was a 3-day weekend.
Oh, that's nice.
And that afforded just a lot of time to take road trips. And, you know, of course, California is pretty much covered in vines. So, you know, you could just pop over to Sonoma, you could pop over to Monterey County, you could drive down the coast to Big Sur. So this just afforded a lot of time to just kind of feed that hobby. And after about 4 years in California, the gentleman I was dating at the time, he happened to be from the Hudson Valley, and we both wanted to return to New York.
Oh, yeah.
We ended up in the Hudson Valley, and you know, I basically dropped everything. I was a little bit burnt out from the whole Silicon Valley scene. And yeah, we dropped into Hudson Valley. And after a couple of months of sort of diddling around going, oh, what am I going to do with my life now? I just started hunting the classifieds. And one day a little ad for a tasting room, a local tasting room in the Hudson Valley popped up. And I kind of went, I could do that. So I went for the interview. They asked me, you know, what can you do for us? And I said, I could build you a database for your wine club members. And because at the time there was no third-party software to do that.
No, I built a couple cellar management things right around that same time. There just wasn't a whole lot back then.
No, it wasn't available, you know. So I think that's probably what clinched it, not just because, you know, I was like, oh, you know, I'm a kid, I love wine.
Yeah. Ooh, she can help us.
They never told me that was the reason they hired me, but I have a pretty good guess, I think.
Yeah.
But, you know, it was one of those things. It was one of the happiest jobs I ever had. You know, I was making minimum wage plus tips. But I was like, for the first time in my life, jumping out of bed to go to work. I mean, of course, hey,
it's so funny that you say that, because when I worked in a tasting room for the longest time, it was the opposite switch. But the guy was a big time engineer, and retired and worked at the winery in the tasting room. And he was like, this is great. I love getting up and coming here. I'm like, really? This is great.
I think, you know, it's partly the novelty of it, of course, you know, because hospitality is a difficult business, you know, and so part of it is the novelty, but the other part was just being able to get that much closer to the process, you know, and while I was, as an engineer, I was a manufacturing engineer, which is all, you know, it's all about building things and creating systems. And this has ended up serving me really well throughout my second career.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So it's been this kind of interesting segue. So, you know, once I had started in that Hudson Valley tasting room, they were at the time called Rivendell Winery, and they had opened up another tasting room in New York City, in Manhattan. It was called Vintage New York. I think it opened, let's see if I can remember my history now, 2000, the end of 2000, I think. And they continued there till about 2009. But was kind of the real clincher for me, because of winery laws in New York, we have an entity that's called a farm winery, and that allows you to sell other wines from other New York made wineries.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And that's still one of the benefits today. So you can have in New York, you can have an alternate location away from your primary licensed location that essentially affords you all of the same allowances as far as production and tasting and so on. So they had started a small scale program offering other wines from around the state in the Hudson Valley tasting room. But then in New York City, they set it up much more like a retail shop.
Okay.
And at any given time, there was, you know, maybe 100, 125, 150 different cuvées from all around New York. And just having to sell those, having to taste them, having to, you know, have some clue of what I'm talking about. You know, that was like sort of this crash course in.
Yeah, what an opportunity.
Yeah, it was an amazing opportunity, you know, where it would take years to travel all around New York State and taste all of these. And here they are all at one central location. And they were offered as everything was open and available to taste for customers. So
yeah, I think a lot of people on the West Coast, they don't really understand how diverse New York is with the
it's kind of a, sort of a, and even to this day, I've been, in the local industry for 22 years. And I still encounter people who have not heard of New York wine.
Yeah.
Of course,
they'll think of the Finger Lakes and all.
Yeah. Finger Lakes, of course, is the biggest region. And, where I'm doing my production on the North Fork, it's such a skinny little piece of land. Is about 30 miles long and, at its widest point, maybe 5 miles wide.
And so really
not
on
much.
Coast.
From
a map, you wouldn't guess that would be a great, just on a map, you wouldn't guess that would be a great place.
Yeah, it's a speck. It's a speck on a map, So if you think it's like akin to, sort of certain village regions, say, and when you get into those micro regions in Bordeaux or in Burgundy or what, it's like that amount of land mass. It's teeny tiny.
And you grew up on Long Island?
I did. Yeah. I grew up in Nassau County.
And is that what drew you back to that region, or was it the kind of what you were tasting in New York?
No, it's my intention to leave Long Island and never return. It's just like, because it's, you're close to New York City, but it's also an island, and it's like impossible to get off of it, the kind of traffic that we have, and I just had, I had ideas when I was a young adult that I wanted to, live in Europe, and I wanted to go here, and I wanted, and I wanted to go experience other things. And yes, I have had that opportunity to do that. And as my sister says to me, she's funny. She's like, Alie, it's like Long Island is a black hole for you. It keeps sucking you back in. Like, I know, because I've left and returned a couple of times, but it was the wine industry that brought me back. But anyway, the brief history of time, once I got involved with Vintage New York, then I started taking more wine classes through the Wine and Spirits Education Trust of London. And then started working for a restaurant group on Long Island when I had moved back to Long Island. And then during this time too, my father had a manufacturing business. So I was working for him on weekdays during the day, and then evenings and weekends, I was doing my other job.
Okay.
I looked at it as sort of getting an education, but getting paid for it, so doing nights and weekends in restaurants or what have you. And then came the opportunity when Southern Wines and Spirits opened up their distribution operation in New York. They had opening in a marketing department for organizing tastings and product demonstrations across New York. And that was a full-time gig. And, there was always in my mind, because my father had always been running the business throughout my life. And, I went to engineering school. It was sort of followed that maybe I'd take over his business someday. And, it took me about a week to work up the nerve to tell him that I was going to leave and, and I'm going to go do this wine thing, So
how did he take that?
He actually took it really, really well, and he's like, I just want you to be happy. He goes, I understand. And I know you've been working in the industry for several years, and I know that you love it. So
follow your passion. That's the best.
Yeah. I wish you well. And so I went to Southern Wines and Spirits, and I wasn't there terribly long for two reasons. One, because I ended up moving to Brooklyn during this time, and two, it was such an intense environment, and I was ping-ponging all over between Staten Island and Westchester and the East End of Long Island. Like, it was just, for me, it was just too much coming and going, trying to cover all of that, such a big region, and manage all of these promotions and whatnot.
It's such a great learning experience, though, to be able to work with Southern Wine and Spirits. I mean, they're one of the biggest distributors, and I don't know many wine owners or people in general that are heads of wine that have worked for a distributor as well. I mean, I worked for an importer, and then sold it to Southern Wine Spirits, and it's a beast of its own.
It is. Oh yeah. And I look at, a lot of people ask me, oh, did you go to school for winemaking? And I did not, and I never took any formal courses in winemaking, but having this kind of experience, like you say, like it was certainly a crash course in understanding how distribution works and what are the dynamics inside of it,
Mhm.
and the literal pounding the pavement that it takes to sell wine.
Mhm.
And that is all of that experience, restaurant, distribution, retail was such an incredible background. If I would recommend to any winery owner, if anyone who's thinking about starting a winery, that you first do something like that, so you have a good understanding of the beast you're jumping into,
Mhm.
and how buyers buy, what they think about when they think about it,
Mhm.
what are your end consumers thinking about, so all this background in the buying and selling of wines really informed how I make my wine,
Mhm.
and balancing how I make what I want to make with what people are going to give me dollars for.
Yeah.
It doesn't always match, but
Yeah, I was gonna ask that. So what is a winemaker? And I know we're kind of jumping ahead, but
that's all right.
what is your style? What drives your passion and style of wine?
I definitely have sort of I'll call it sort of an old world mindset as
Mhm.
far as flavor profile, but not necessarily, super duper traditional in the production methodology. On the North Fork, because we have, we're considered a cool-ish climate. It's definitely more cool climate as you go up into the Finger Lakes,
Mhm.
where we are in the North Fork with Long Island jutting out into the Atlantic. We have influence from the Gulf Stream. We've got temperance of our temperatures from the Atlantic itself.
Uh-huh.
And so we have a lot of growing conditions that enable us to grow a lot of the Bordeaux varieties and some Germanic varieties, some Northern Italian things, even some Southern French grapes as well. So there's, I think of winemaking as you can't force grapes to become something they're not.
Mhm.
And in the very early days on the North Fork, a lot of what was planted was Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, and Merlot.
Mm.
Turns out Chardonnay and Merlot do really, really, really well here.
Really?
Cabernet Sauvignon likes very specific locations.
Uh-huh.
Pinot Noir has a really hard time because it's so humid here and its
Okay.
skins are so thin.
And
But people were planting what they wanted to sell and what they liked, as opposed to what works. And what I learned early on at Vintage New York, working there, people would come in and ask for a Cabernet Sauvignon in the style of something coming out of Napa or Sonoma. Or not Napa or Sonoma.
Yeah.
And so, I personally feel that Cabernet Sauvignon, yes, it's very much possible to grow it here, but it's very, very rare that you're going to make the big beast.
Yeah, you're going to get more of a
Europe.
I would think you get like a European expression of it.
Exactly.
Or something from the high areas of Italy.
Right. So, you have to have realistic expectations. It's all about matching the right grape to the right place, and then using the tools to get the best out of the expression of that grape that Mother Nature is giving you that year. So that was, it's not just a stylistic thing that I enjoy, but it's also a practical thing as far as making wine in our region, as European. But then I like to play and experiment. As one of the first winemakers on the North Fork to start dabbling in orange wine and skin.
Yes, I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But before we talk about North Fork, I want to hear about this Brooklyn Oenology. You were one of the first New York urban wineries. Now, was this the first place you made wine? Or
so where did you go from Southern Wine and Spirits?
So while I was employed by Southern, I ended up moving into Brooklyn, which I was already eyeballing moving in there, and that was in 2005. And at this moment, the whole local food movement and local beverage scene, the local food movement in particular, was really sort of nascent, but it was percolating hard, right? But the scene that it is now was just starting to switch on. And it was still like a lot of warehouse parties and artist lofts, and it was like all those, it's kind of cool, you feel like you're kind of underground kind of stuff that's going on. But what I was literally out for a walk on a Sunday afternoon one day, just bebopping around. I happened to live close to Red Hook, and so I was like, I'm just gonna go bebop around Red Hook. And there's some beautiful warehouses, because Red Hook used to be, before the Brooklyn Queens Expressway was built, Red Hook was like the center for shipping in Brooklyn. It's since moved to New Jersey. But there's these beautiful brick warehouses, and there's these what I call in my head, sort of these creative businesses between glass blowing but also artist studios, furniture makers. There was a parachute designer in there, of all things, and it just sort of occurred to me, like, bing, why couldn't you put a winery into one of these warehouses? And then I was all like electric. My skin was on fire. I'm like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing. Oh, yeah, we got to do this, okay, but how? So at the time, the only kind of, I'll call it modern day beverage thing going on in Brooklyn was Brooklyn Brewery. And I think at that moment, maybe 6 Point Brewery was just starting up. Back in the 40s and 50s, there had just passed prohibition. There had been a lot of breweries in Brooklyn, but with the consolidation of the market, they just disappeared. So, and really the first regeneration of that was with Brooklyn Brewery in the late 90s. But, it occurred to me, like, if somebody's making beer in Brooklyn, there's no reason somebody could not make wine there. Oh, yeah. There's plenty of space for it. So I spent the next year defining what that brand would be, what it would look like. And that ultimately became the brand Brooklyn Oenology. And that's the name under which I started the company. That was
such a cool name. I mean,
thanks. Unfortunately, Oenology is hard for the layperson to, when they see the word, they're like, what is that? Yeah. So the working title was Brooklyn Wineworks, and I should have just kept it Brooklyn Wineworks, but
I like the
let's be nerdy here. Let's call it Brooklyn.
What the heck is this? Is this a lab?
Yeah. I would get calls, like calls from medical supply companies looking for oncology, and I go, oh, what have I done? All right, well, it's too late. But anyway, but the whole premise of the brand, though, was to work with exclusively New York grown fruit, and then match the bottlings with artworks from contemporary artists based in Brooklyn. And it'd be like this story of Brooklyn as a place of makers. Yeah. And, so bringing together the agriculture, and the social culture of the area and celebrating that, and it becomes, on the bottle, sort of a little traveling gallery, if you will. And those labels they were designed to peel off. You could peel off the front label so you could keep the artwork.
Yeah, that was
really.
Yeah, when I showed Bianca that, she was like, "What?"
That's the first time I've ever heard. That is a great idea.
It's costly, but it's worth it. Yeah, it's just fun, and used to find the labels, stuck in random places on like street signs and things like that.
Oh, did the label turn into a sticker?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
that's even better.
It's this double layered thing, it's got the right adhesive to keep it attached to the bottle, but then when you peel it off, you can slap it onto something else.
That's perfect.
So yeah, and so I had started producing those wines in 2006, and I was getting the licensing together and all of that. But before I started actually making the wines, I went, well, I don't really have any production experience. So, and I know from my sales backgrounds that I have a certain style in mind, so I had a good where I wanted to start. So I started hunting around for basically, a harvest position for the season. And I knew about Premium Wine Group, which is where I still do my production to this day.
Oh, okay.
But I've sent out resumes to West Coast, East Coast.
Is that a custom crush facility, or?
Yeah, it's Custom Crush Winery. That was opened in 1998, I believe. And its very purpose was meant to host smaller producers or startups or what have you.
Sure.
And it's since grown into quite a tremendous operation. But it was run, it's run by a gentleman, Russell Hearn. He's a longtime winemaker. He's originally from Australia, but he's done winemaking on the East Coast of the US for many, many years. And he was a longtime winemaker at Pellegrini Vineyards, also on the North Fork. And I had always loved Pellegrini wines. And I thought, if there's ever anybody that I want to learn from, I'd love to learn from him. So I was really, I was really hoping to get that position at Premium Wine Group, and I did. Awesome. So like, woo. And so that's where I met my now business partner, who we joined forces in 2014, Robin Epperson McCarthy. So she was running the lab at Premium. I became her lab assistant, but I also got thrown into the cellar. But again, it was like one of those very immersive experiences, because at a custom contract facility, it's not just one winery with one set of fruit coming from a single vineyard. It's really a hub of the North Fork. And so, with multiple winemakers running through there and different grapes, this one grows Viognier, but that one grows Sauvignon Blanc, and working in the lab and every day smelling the effects of what we were doing, what we were doing with the wines, and measuring the bricks every day, and measuring or going around and sniffing all the tanks to make sure nothing's going awry. It was like boom, 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 this really fast learning. And
do you think that if you came into it at the right time too? I mean,
definitely. Yeah.
Try to do what you've done now without, this experience. Like,
it would be so different. Yeah, that's an amazing question, Bianca. Yeah. It was one of those things, like my father's always said, business is part ideas, part luck, and certainly that timing was incredible, to be able to jump in at that moment.
Oh yeah. And such a good opportunity with all everything coming to you, and to see all the diversity and all the different expressions of the wine around there.
Yeah. And get to talk to, and then that very same year, I started assembling my first wines. And the first vintages, I just did custom blends because I knew I didn't have the skill yet to really manage my own fermentations yet. But then between the idea of what I wanted to produce to begin with, plus now this newfound experience at the winery, plus, finding my non-shy voice to, ask so-and-so winemaker, hey, what do you think? And getting some guidance with that. I have to say, I was really happy with them. I was really proud of myself for the first two wines that I put together. And then, by the time all the licensing got put together and all of the legal stuff was in place, I was able to start selling in 2007, so it was like me and a wheelie bag and a cell phone and a lot of pluck,
Made it, now I got to sell it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. So.
And so you opened the tasting room. That was, so did you have the tasting room for your first release, or then you opened up the tasting room?
Yes, I waited a couple years before opening a tasting room. I didn't come into the business with millions of dollars or anything. I basically funded it on a small inheritance from my grandmother's passing, and it was I wanted to do a little proof of concept as well, because there was not really much of a beverage scene at the time, and was this going to work? Were people going to be even interested in this? And so, I sort of had this 3-phase plan in my head, where phase 1 was to start out with wholesale and gain a little foothold in the market and really, gauge the interest, if you will, and the response. And especially because, it still, that even more so then, of course, there was less awareness about New York wines in particular. So,
and did you just start with just pounding the pavement in Manhattan and
Manhattan and Brooklyn, and knocking on doors and saying and bringing bottles with me and be, hey, look at my pretty bottles with the gorgeous art on it, and and it was also that kind of, to your point, Bianca, it being like good timing, because it was before everything was named like Brooklyn soap and Brooklyn toothbrushes and all of that. Putting the Brooklyn name
got the hype, right?
Yeah, right. So it's still very much a novelty to have Brooklyn referenced in the name of a product.
Sure.
So at least I had the element of novelty behind me at the time. But then of course that was the marketing bit, but then you have to have good juice in the bottle, of course, to back it up. Otherwise it's fun one time, but it has to be fun a lot more than one time in order for it to be a successful product. But by 2009, I started realizing that I had gotten enough traction, but people wanted to connect further with the brand. And in a couple of conversations with my colleagues, they said, really having a tasting room is a way for people to really get a sense tangibility around your brand and your product.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, okay. In 2009, it was the after the housing crash and the recession.
Mm-hmm.
So there happened to be a lot of really good deals on rent. So again, good timing,
Oh,
And it was
sure.
like, I happened to be in the right place at the right time over. And I'm like, what, the universe is just delivering. Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a terrific spot again in one of these beautiful brick warehouses. And this was my sort of phase 2 idea, get the tasting room going. And
Mm-hmm.
so in late 2009, I got a lease. By November 2010, I had it all outfitted and designed, and we
Were
had
there other
our
anchor businesses there, or was there a place that would draw the crowds, or were you the
there
crowd?
it just started. It happened to be one of these streets. It was on Wythe Avenue in Williamsburg, and of course, the big street in Williamsburg was Bedford. That's the main drag, if you will. And this was a couple of blocks over. But when I started looking around for a space, I saw people kind of walking their dogs and riding their bikes through, and I just went, I can smell it. It's going to pop. This section of the neighborhood is going to pop. And sure enough, it's just, there was
right time, right place.
a gourmet market that had opened up across the street, and then we opened, and there's a couple other small restaurants, and then before you knew it was like boom, 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 and older buildings being knocked down, and luxury condo buildings going up, and the whole thing. So I got myself in there for a really good price, and then all this other stuff just started appearing and falling into place. And a couple of times New York Times wrote about Wythe Avenue and how it's popped open, and this tasting room on the edge of between North and South Williamsburg, kind of thing. I was like, oh, that's me. Cool.
Yeah. What was it? So during your time at the Brooklyn Oenology, what was the biggest learning thing that you took away from there into your new ventures?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think, so there's always shifts in demographics and what people want and what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not just in what people want to eat and drink. I think what we had to offer to eat and drink had always been suitable. But what I learned, this was a huge, almost more like a philosophical lesson, is that there are so many forces at work around you in the context of doing business that you just cannot control.
Mm-hmm.
And they buffet you around. And so as the neighborhood got more and more popular, it shifted from sort of like a den of artists to a little bit more well-heeled but creative professionals who could drop a little bit more money. And so that was like the meat of our customer base.
Oh, okay.
And they would live around the corner, and they would be the people who'd come in for a few glasses in the evening and hang out and have something to eat and drink, come to our events, and then go home with 6 bottles. And then as Brooklyn became, Brooklyn, it became much more of a tourist destination, as well as a family destination. And they just spend their money differently, and they weren't spending their money in a way that aligned with what we were doing.
Okay.
And then big box retailers were coming, Levi's jeans came in, J. Crew came in, and a lot of my small business owners were kind of talking amongst yourselves, like, how are they surviving here? Until we realized that it wasn't about making money on those locations. It was just like a billboard in the shape of a cube, and you could happen to go inside the billboard and buy some stuff.
It's like the Gap at 8 in Ashbury.
Yeah. Right. So, and as other establishments open, like our operation was plucky, and it was resourceful, and we didn't spend a ton of money on design. Like I sourced all of the furniture myself. I designed it myself. Whereas, so it wasn't like this sort of Danish modern polished looking place. It had it had an industrial vibe. It had a nod to the history of the building. It I had all my bar stools and chairs were all mismatched kind of thing. We made tables out of fire doors sort of thing. And it was cool. It was really fun. It was definitely different than everything else. And it was also under 1,000 square feet. So it wasn't, it wasn't the type of place where you could have big events. So as I saw sort of these shiny places appearing around the neighborhood, I realized, okay, this is what the neighborhood demographic wants. And it took me a while to realize it, that, I was trying to figure out for a long time, because of course, as a small business owner, of course, your ego gets wrapped up in it. It becomes part of your identity, and what should I do? And, I was just sort of like, got stuck, because I could see like what I was doing was not going to survive. And also rents were increasing rapidly in the area too. So I thought to myself, all right, sometimes what you need to do in order to expand is to contract. And what I came to realize is that if I was going to continue in Brooklyn, the original idea was then to eventually open a production winery. But because of the phenomenon of Brooklyn, the real estate prices went crazy, and it just didn't make sense to kind of reinvent the wheel when I was already working out of a winery on the North Fork that had everything I needed. And, for some people, if they wanted to come in and pour those millions of dollars into it, great, but that was not my situation, and it's not what I wanted to necessarily take a risk on. And
like logistically, from Brooklyn to North Fork, how long does it take to drive, commute, or get there?
Depend what time of day.
On a Saturday at 10 a.m.
Yeah. I mean, these days it can take 2.5, 3.5 hours, if you hit it at the wrong time. Yeah. So that back and forth is nutty, So I had realized, at least with the Brooklyn location, that I was going to have to turn into some kind of event space or make it a shiny sort of almost restaurant space. And I realized that's actually not who I am. And that's not why I got into the winemaking business in the first place. I wanted to make wine. You know, I really enjoy the tasting room aspect of it, but doing a restaurant type of thing is not my raison d'etre, so to speak. So that prompted the shift out to the North Fork.
The exodus.
Yeah. I had moved out there to live in 2014.
Okay.
And that's the point at which my now partner, Robin, became involved with me. She wanted to start her brand, which is called Saltbird Cellars, which is one of the 5 brands that we have as Chronicle. And I started production on a sort of a more eponymous label. It's called As If Wines, where
another cool name for a wine. You win the wine awards.
Thanks. And I wanted to tell a bit more of a personal story with those. So now all of a sudden, okay, here we are with 3 brands. But it wasn't until 2017 that we had, well, actually, so we closed the Brooklyn tasting room at the end of 2016. There wasn't any design on another location yet, but a colleague of ours had some space in this very crooked but very North Fork old building, where nothing is square anymore because it's probably 175 years old. But it's charming and was like just the right size, small, manageable, intimate, could really talk one-on-one with people. And, they had originally had in the second half, there was 2 storefronts in this building. In the other storefront, they'd had a small sort of high-end sandwich and coffee shop that they had stopped. They had stopped operation on that, but they were using it as overflow space for their tasting room. And they got in touch with us and were like, you guys want the other half? And kind of went, oh, wow. Again, something fell on our lap, So we got everything together, we organized, and within 3 months we were open in June 2017, and we had a new tasting room.
Oh, that's awesome. And did you open that under the Brooklyn Oenology label or
kind of? Yeah. So the company was still Brooklyn Oenology, but we're like, that doesn't quite relate on the North Fork because we are 100 miles away from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So we called it, to begin with, Peconic Cellar Door, because it's in the town of Peconic.
Oh, okay.
And Cellar Door, my husband happens to be Australian, so I've spent a lot of time in Australia. And Robin has also spent a lot of time doing wine work in Australia. So it was sort of a nod to our roots, and to our background with that. So we had these 3 brands, and we're selling these 3 brands. It was started out as sort of a cooperative tasting room between us, but we were doing all of the production under the one Brooklyn Oenology license. And then in 2000, later that year, I put out a label called Haywater Cove, which was sort of a tip of the hat to the North Fork. And it's a tiny little waterway that you'd never spot on a map unless you were really looking for it. But
now, why so many brands? So talk to me about, that's a interesting, that's where
I didn't even realize they were all your brands. I thought
It's
others.
It's kind of, because we're two winemakers and we both have our individual stories and histories, and these, part of a brand is of course telling a story and sending a message. So the Brooklyn brand, of course, is about Brooklyn. And then the As If Wines was something a little bit more personal to me. Haywater Cove was like, oh, this is my new home and I love it here. It's beautiful. And Saltbird was meant to encompass Robin's travels to the other side of the world and back, and a lot of the names of those wines reference, leaving and coming back, sort of rejuvenated or changed or something. And Saltbird is kind of the sort of made up word for birds you find by the ocean, but this is what prompted us to adopt the umbrella name of Chronicle Wines, where chronicles are stories, and our tagline is every bottle holds a story.
And that's why your title is Chapter Builder?
Yeah.
And that's the meaning behind Chronicle Wines.
Yeah.
So, I was like, does this have to do with Brooklyn Chronicles? And then I live in, the Bay Area. San Francisco Chronicle.
Yes, so as you mentioned when we first chat. Yep. Yeah. So we definitely have a lot of names, but that's meant to be able to tell the stories that we tell.
Sure. So what's like the different stories between the two? Yeah. So As If Wines, what's that story?
I'm glad you asked. It really started out of this feeling of sort of gratitude that I sort of discovered this career, discovered this life, and I started thinking a lot. I'm very much a thinker and a philosopher, and I started thinking like, how did I get this lucky? Because to find what you love to do in life is hard enough as it is.
Sure.
But to be able to access not just resources, but to find the thing inside yourself, to get the gumption to go ahead with it, like where does that come from? And I started thinking about the confluence of this terrific family I have, not just my nuclear family, but my extended family, my in-laws, and it's in being taught by my parents that to believe in myself, and being born in the early 70s where still a lot of girls were not taught that you can pursue business and you can pursue mathematics and science, and learning a sense of courage. My mother struggled a lot with mental illness, but she still had the courage every day to keep trying to forge forward. And to have that. So a lot of these names of the wines under the As If label are meant to celebrate sort of this confluence of, opportunities that come your way, but also having some wherewithal inside yourself to begin an understanding of what to do with these opportunities when they come to you.
Sure.
And so the if part of the name, it's such a tiny but such a powerful word, because inside of every question you ask yourself about, what if I turn left? What if I turn right? What if I choose to do this thing or that thing? This is what creates your path, your momentum. And so the names of the wines, there's a white wine called Serendipity. And serendipity is so much more than chance. It's an opportunity coming to you, but you have to be ready to use that opportunity, or you have to be looking for it. And sometimes the opportunity you don't realize that it's there because you're not ready to see it. Or courage, is realizing that, oh man, this thing scares the crap out of me. But what if I do it? What if I succeed? And sort of seeing your fear, recognize it, saying, I see you and I'm not daunted by you. I'm gonna give it a try. Persistence, when, because like every small business owner, every 2 weeks you look up at the ceiling and go, what have I done? But you persist through that. You ride the waves, and you tackle the obstacles. Gratitude is another wine. That's a big one. That's a huge one. Being thankful for just even be able to attempt this. Gratitude really is a form of success. If you just have gratitude to be able to even just try, that is in and of itself success beyond financial success.
Oh, sure.
I love this.
Yeah. That was sort of, thinking about like how lucky I get, like how do I send that message out to the universe and, forward that positivity.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that's about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, so I have no segue, but where do orange wines fit in?
Yeah, they can fit in anywhere you want. Yeah.
I really love orange wines, and I love the movement. Not
Yeah.
a movement, but like 3-4 years ago, you didn't see them anywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
and now every wine list that I look at has a red, wine, and orange on the menu.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. And, even though they sort of came back into the wine making scene,
Mhm.
maybe a decade or so ago, but like you said, it's only been in the last 3, 4, 5 years that
Yeah.
you've actually seen them on by the glass lists in restaurants.
Yeah.
And,
What excites
it's like
you
everything
most?
else, you have that it kind of gets started and then all of a sudden it just goes, it takes
Mhm.
off.
Yeah, I worked for a winery and the winemaker was from South Africa.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so that was the first time that I had experienced orange wines because it's a bigger thing out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
They're really fascinating. It's like so much else, out in the world, everything old is new again.
Mhm.
But what I find fascinating about orange wines is why we're making them, and why they're revived. It's since the biggest collection of orange wines were produced in northern Italy and Eastern Europe. It's surmised that they started to appear, maybe 800, 600 years ago, something to that effect. And what's thought to be the reason for producing wine in this manner is with the lack of mechanical refrigeration, the color compounds and the tannins that are extracted from the skins basically act as oxygen absorbers. So
Yeah.
protect the wine from spoilage for at least a certain amount of time. And that's very much why more often red wine can age longer than white wines, because it has the tannin and the color to do a lot of absorption. But that also that combining with oxygen is also part of the flavor development and the aging of wines.
Sure.
What I think of now is why we're making orange wines is because there are so many interesting flavors that you just don't get otherwise.
That's what I'm loving about it.
Yeah, like especially in certain grape varieties, like there's some magic in those skins that you just
So
don't
many
get.
layers of complexity. Like I saw you. Well, I was looking at some of your tech sheets before the show, and the one with laid on the Gewürztraminer skins.
Yeah.
I imagine that's got to be just fantastic.
I love working with Gewürztraminer for orange wine. I was just we're about to start harvesting grapes for vintage like any minute now. So I was just in the vineyard this afternoon with one of the growers that I'm buying from, and yesterday afternoon. Anyway, it was Gewürztraminer, and we're talking about how we're both obsessed with it. It's because it's a grape that's got so much character. It can be one that's hard to learn to love. At least for me, it was hard to learn to love because it is so
it can be out there
in your face.
I love it.
But it's like
girls are meaner 5 times faster.
Yeah.
Can't ever say a word. That's what I used to tell people. Girls will meaner. You'll eventually get Gewürztraminer.
There you go. Yep. You just got to repeat it. You just got to break it up into Gewürztraminer. And then, get your little German corner of yourself on and Gewürztraminer, But when I started playing with it as a skin ferment in 2012, and it was like a revelation. It was really, it's not as colorful as Pinot Gris, but it does have this beautiful, like shining, luminescent orange color. But then when you have the fruit that's ripe enough to also macerate further on the seeds, and this it's like eating a charcuterie plate. It's amazing. It's like eating a piece of prosciutto with a piece of manchego with a piece of fig on top and an almond slice.
That's a perfect visual.
It must be a New Yorker's thing with the Gewürztraminer. I had a coworker who was a chef too, but he's from New York. And man, he would bring in some of the best, craziest Gewürztraminers I had ever had in my life. And it was his favorite. I mean, from sweet to bone dry, and then would do like food pairings for us to try. And
awesome.
And he was a big New Yorker.
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah.
must be a popular New York grape varietal.
It's fun. Well, it's, we grow an amount of it here, so it's accessible. It's not necessarily an easy sell to the consumer, Because a lot of people have the idea that Gewürztraminer is categorically sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Same way as Riesling is often thought of by the
Mm-hmm.
consumer. Just that's a misunderstanding, because so much of say Riesling introduced to the general public, was sweet or demi-sweet.
Yeah, they introduced Riesling through Blue Nun in this.
Yeah, exactly. So but once sort of the demographic, or not the demographic, but is the sort of the masses, I'll call it,
Mm-hmm.
once they kind of get an idea of what a certain grape is, then it's very hard to unstick it.
Oh yeah.
But Gewürztraminer is a chameleon like Riesling, where it makes incredible wines from dessert style to semi-sweet to bone freaking dry. And when I do it as an orange wine style and do it dry, it's it looks like a sherry. When people see it in the bottle and they haven't, or really any orange wine in the bottle, and they're looking, they're giving it, if they haven't had experience with orange wines before, they give it the side eye, like, what, it looks like a sherry, but it has Gewürztraminer in it. It kind of smells like it's desserty, but then it's this really dry sort of citrusy palate that then blooms into nuts and oranges and spices and honey. And they're like, what is happening in my mouth right now? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But that's so much fun to me to introduce it to someone who hasn't had orange wine, or even people who have had orange wines, because orange wines themselves can be so range in style, and they have so much diversity depending on what grape you're using, where it's from, and so on. They're really fun to chat with people about.
Sure. No, I so do you do orange wines for all your different brands, or just as the?
I do an orange wine for the Brooklyn Oenology label called Broken Land, which side note is a extremely literal translation of the Dutch Broekelen.
Oh, it kind of said, I'm like, oh yeah.
Yeah. It's what the Dutch called Brooklyn, Brooklyn. So that's where that goes from. And then I do an orange Pétillant Naturel for As If, and that's the Gratitude wine. I do a skin ferment, and then nab a bunch of that volume, press it off, chill it down really quickly to halt the ferment, and then bottle it up, and then let it warm up again and finish ferment in the bottle.
That sounds fantastic. And you're doing so much fun stuff. I'm not even trying to talk about it. Like, you get these spritzers that look delicious for the summer.
They are so good. They're like grown-up soda.
What's that brand? The Canner?
Canette. Yeah.
I was going to say canless, but it's canned. So
yeah, those are really fun. We've created a monster with that. Even though I make all these really fun wines, to be honest, my refrigerator at home is stuffed with canettes. And what's fun about those, it's basically like an answer to the canned cocktail movement and the seltzer movement. It's like, it's not your Bartles and James, but instead of making a wine spritzer at home, have a glass of wine and pour some seltzer in it. These are pre-canned, pre-made. It's all made of wine that Robin and I ferment, and we've come up with all of the flavor combos for it. It's natural flavor.
Some wild ones like the orange and cardamom red.
That one's that's a sleeper hit. That's one of my favorites. It reads like a sangria in the summer, but has enough warm spice that it's really appealing in winter also. We've made them dry. We like to call them winemakers wine spritzers, so that they don't have that. They don't have that Jolly Rancher sickly sweet, kind of profile to them. It tastes like you made a wine spritzer in your house.
I love a good. I'm doing it all the time. My wife can never kind of see why I'm putting ice and Pellegrino in my wine, but
well, then I should send you some of these so you guys can try these out, because
these sound fantastic.
No, I've been eyeballing these since we talked the first time.
I should have said something sooner.
I would love to try them.
All right, we'll set it up. Because get you a little supply. Yeah. Oh yeah, you got to try them. Yeah, we're so excited about them, and we launched those just before the pandemic.
I would say perfect timing for that.
Yeah, too. Awesome timing. Yeah, that was the one thing we did not time properly. Who would have thought? So now that the wholesale market's coming back, it's switching on again. So
but the whole canned cocktail category has just exploded over the last 2 years.
It's gone bananas. It's gone bananas.
So I'm loving what I'm seeing just across the whole category.
There's
I'm loving everything I taste, but I'm loving the fact that
it's
that's so many different curiosities.
so many of my customers have heard me say, you can't like everything. Every once in a while somebody comes in and be like, that's not my favorite. I'm like, that's okay. You can't like all the paintings in the world. You really can't like all the beverages in the world.
No one would love anything.
No one would love anything, but
love it.
If you liked all the beverages, imagine how flat out drunk on the floor you'd be, every day of the week. You can't do that to yourself. So feel free to be picky.
That's so great. Yeah, I could talk all day. There's one question I love to ask everyone is what keeps you motivated?
I think at this stage in my life, and having been running this company for 16 years now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, after 16 years.
Yeah.
Be motivated by something.
Yeah, exactly. You got to be motivated by something. I think I love the most. I love the creation of things. Mm-hmm. And I love all the good feelings that come out of that. Mm-hmm. And it's not just good feelings for me, but we have an amazing team at our winery, and it's not just my business partner, Robin. We've like grown up together in this industry, and we're also really good friends. And it's not just the joy of working with a good business partner, but working with our team members who bring so much to the table. We worked hard to rebrand the company, and we feel really proud about doing that, moving things into a new chapter. Yeah. It's about that building and creating that gets me up every day. And, hopefully you can make a few dollars at it while you're doing it too, and one thing I feel really proud about as well over the course of running this business is also kind of being I'll call it as like a generation point for a number of other people to advance in their careers as well. Just before we started this today, I was talking with my old tasting room manager from Brooklyn, my tasting room manager, and he's got this burgeoning set of restaurants that are doing really, really well. He's gotten all kinds of reviews in the New Yorker magazine, and he's about to open a couple other locations, and he's killing it, and at the tasting room, it was the crappiest thing I ever had to do was to have to let him go when I closed the tasting room. But also at the same time, I always knew he was going to be up to something amazing, and to see him doing it, like, if he were still working for me at this point, I'd be like, get the hell out of here because you're too good for this and go do something of your own. Right. Or another young woman who worked for us in our North Fork tasting room for a couple of years. And then she got taken on by another winery as assistant winemaker, and now has become production winemaker and vineyard manager. So her career is taking off. So having that opportunity, like, to pass things down the ladder, so to speak, and to help bring other people into an industry that they love and to thrive in it. Another person who worked for me in Brooklyn, he worked in the tasting room. He's now a winemaker out in Sonoma.
Oh, is he?
And he's also doing orange wines too. It's called Glassmaker Wines. Really small production. He's doing some really interesting things. Jonathan Ruffin is his name.
So your reach just kind of grow.
Yeah. It's just that gives me so much joy. Is that kind of being able to pass something on like that.
You want to give people the opportunity that you were
given. And that, it's very much part of my ethos that I try to express in as if, it's just, even without that brand, that's a way of being that I've just discovered and I think is important to embrace and pass on.
Well, we gotta continue this conversation in another episode. This has been fascinating. But Alie, so where can people find out more about you, Chronicle Wines, and all your brands?
So our the Chronicle website is chroniclewines.co, because of course .com was already taken, so we had to, just to make it interesting. And we have just a couple of months ago we launched a brand new shiny new e-commerce store. We did a serious upgrade, and that's shop.chroniclewines.co. We're on Instagram as Drink Chronicle. And if you're curious about the wine spritzers, also Drink Canet on Instagram. And my personal Instagram handles are at As If Wines and also at Alie Shaper, which is ALIESHAPER. And I broadcast on there too a little bit about our Australian winemakings we're vineyard growing right now. But
oh, wow.
Yeah. So we got that. That's a whole other can of worms we can talk about some
wow,
other time. Yeah.
Oh, international.
Oh yeah. Taking over the world. From the tip of Long Island.
That's awesome.
And yeah. And then, we of course have our tasting room in Peconic on the North Fork, on Peconic Lane. And it's a beautiful, intimate little space. We've got one half of it is set up sort of as a lounge and the other half is set up, just come in and shop. Yeah. And we've got everything that we make there, including some of our very small batch sort of house label wines that we only sell in the tasting room too. Yeah.
Pretty good. Oh, that's awesome. Well, Alie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate
really
it.
Special conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely. You have a great evening.
You too. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.